Hey guys, today we got a bit of an interesting one. We're actually doing a 1UZ that's been converted to run with a 3UZ ECU and a 6-speed automatic gearbox. So let's get into it. Right, so as I said, this is going to be a bit of a unique one. Basically what's happened is the customer ended up with a 1UZ VVT-i, but he wanted to run the 6-speed automatic gearbox because he wanted Tiptronic. So what we've done is we've converted his 1UZ harness to use a 3UZ ECU so he can then plug in the 6-speed automatic gearbox at the back of the 1UZ engine. So first thing we're going to do is we've got photos of what we've all done. So we're going to take you through the process of how we stripped everything down, how we built everything new, how we added everything in. Then what we're going to do is we're going to go through the layout of the harness and then we're going to do the testing. So back in a second. Right, so as I said, that's just showing you guys exactly what we've done to the harness. Obviously, we've stripped everything down completely, removed everything that wasn't necessary, added in what we needed to add in, and this is the final product that you have here. So as I said, first thing we're going to do is we're going to go through the layout of the harness, working our way from the ECU end all the way along. Then we're going to go through everything, so obviously a big explanation as to exactly what we've changed to make it work with the 3UZ. And then obviously we'll do the testing, again made up of two parts as per usual, one with just the ignition on and one with the engine running. So let's jump into the layout, and that's going to start right here at the ECU end. So as you can appreciate, obviously all the ECU plugs are different between a 1UZ and a 3UZ. So we've obviously had to remove all the 1UZ ECU plugs and we replaced them all with 3UZ ECU plugs, re-terminated all the wires, and obviously only kept the ones that we required and added in new what we needed to add in new. So on the ECU side, it's really nice and simple. You've got 3 plugs over there, you've got 2 plugs over there. They are all unique, they can't plug into the wrong place, so super simple. These are what I call the body plugs, and they make their way directly there to the fuse box. So all the powers and everything the ECU needs and what it controls gets taken through there. In the same set of plugs, we have our pedal connector. So you can see it is labeled there as pedal. Goes to a 6-pin DTM plug, and then we have a nice long 2-meter cable that then goes to the customer's pedal over there. So he can then sort that out nice and simple. Right, so those are the ECU plugs. Really simple, like I said, can't plug them in the wrong way. Nothing hard there. Pedal plug, which is all labeled on both sides. So again, you can't mix that up. Coming out the harness though is the next plug that goes into the fuse box, and that goes directly over there. And again, the fuse box is the exact same principle as the ECU. All of these plugs are unique, so you cannot plug them into the wrong place. So you don't need to worry about knowing where each one goes. You'll find out very quickly as you start plugging them in. The other 2 plugs you see here on the fuse box is what I call the customer plugs, aka what you're going to be installing in your vehicle. We have our usual 9-pin plug, which we will go through at the end of the video anyway, but we've got our 9-pin plug, and then we've got our 12-pin plug over there, and that includes the OBD2 connector. And as you can see, we've got it hooked up to a machine so we can do diagnostics, which will again be part of the testing that we carry out later on. Right, so that is sort of the internal structure over there, and it makes its way up to here, and then we have the original 1UZ grommet. Now, in this case, we haven't actually secured the grommet to the harness. The customer might be in a position where he has to move this grommet depending on where it's going to end up. So we've left it like that. And then obviously once he gets it into the correct position, then he can secure it in whichever way he sees fit. But moving along from there, we then end up to our piece of plastic at the back of the engine over here. Now, as usual, we actually have an LS430 3UZ engine, so the mounting points for this piece of plastic are not present if this is a 1UZ harness, but there are 3 mounting points in total. We have one mounting point over here, we have one mounting point down in there, and then the one that is shared with the 3UZ is the mounting point down there, which we've got a bolt in there already. Okay, so again, this fits on the back of the engine. If it's a 1UZ engine originally, all the mounting holes will be there and you can bolt that down nice and secure. First thing that pops out there is going to be this section, which is going to go up and over the fuel pulsation damper, not regulator. Please don't screw those screws with a screwdriver. You're only going to damage it. But it comes in through there, and then we end up at our next piece of plastic that holds everything together. And that's nice and simple. You've got 2 mounting points, one over there and one over there. Just bolts down, super simple. Now then, moving along here, one change we do make between the 1UZ is the coil, which is number 7 over here. Now, normally coil 7 comes out here and then stretches across there and goes down to there. Not sure why they did that, because in the 3UZ later versions, they moved the coil 7 and injector 7 to come out of this section over here. Whereas on the 1UZ, only the injector came out here and the coil came out here. Again, not 100% sure why they did that, but we changed it around because it makes it much easier to fit the harness when you guys get it on your end. Right. Now then, obviously I've gone through coil 7 and injector 7 over there. Just quickly to refresh you so that you know exactly which cylinder is which on these particular engines. Basically, this is the left bank. So again, you're looking from the driver's perspective. Driver would be sitting here. This is the left bank, that is the right bank. Left bank has all the odd numbers, so you have cylinder 1, 3, 5, and 7. The right bank has all the even numbers, so you've got 2, 4, 6, and 8. I'll go through them as I go along, but just thought I'd give you an overview right at the beginning. Right, so we've established injector 7 and coil 7 come out in this little section over here. Moving further along, we have the next section that comes out, and that's going to have just injector 5 and coil 5. Nice and simple. It basically comes out exactly where they are. Then we go to the front of this plastic section and we have the last breakout coming out in this direction, and that's going to have 3 parts that come out. It's going to be injector 3, it's going to be coil 3, and it's going to be the VVL cam sensor. Basically, this is measuring the inlet cam for the VVT-i system. So making sure that what the ECU is commanding is actually being seen on the cam itself. So again, we do have 3 cam sensors, which you'll notice when we go through the rest of the harness. Right. Moving here now, where the harness carries on down along the engine, we then have our little noise filter plug in over there. So that plugs in over there. You should normally have it somewhere here on the engine, and you just plug that straight in over there. You'll notice that we have removed the evap little canister, little 2-pin plug over there. So again, we don't use that. It's all mapped out of the ECU. So again, don't have to worry about that. That is now completely gone, so you don't have to worry about plugging that in. So the little vacuum solenoid valve that's about here as well, you can then just remove that entirely. Right, so as you can see, the harness comes along here, and we have another breakout towards the front, and that's going to be 3 sections as well. It's going to be injector 1, it's going to be coil 1, and it is going to be the oil control valve for the left bank. So this is the oil control valve that actually controls the VVT-i system. All right. Then the harness moves along here, and you'll see there's a little mounting point there that you can fasten it down to over there. But it breaks out into 2 sections, and basically it just goes down here to the cam sensor at the front. So that's cam sensor number 2 of the 3. Then the harness runs along here, and you'll see I've got some temporary clips in here, but there's a mounting point there and a mounting point there to keep the harness out of the way of everything else. Pops down to over here, and then right here at the top of this little bracket here, you'll see that it splits into 2 sections. Now this is one of the sections that we've added in, so you'll see that's covered in heat shrink over there. But they basically go down through there. Now in this case, the customer will have an 1UZ VVT-i, so his oil filter will actually be here, and his oil pressure switch will actually be facing backwards in that direction. That's the reason we split it up there. So you can either bring it through here, down through there, and plug in there. On the LS430, obviously, it would normally come down along with the crank plug, which is over here. So that's the other section that carries on down through there, as you can see. There they are there. Comes down to the crank sensor. And because we're using the LS430 engine, our oil pressure switch is over here. So again, nice and simple. Right, so that is that section over there. So let's pop back to the back of the engine, and let's go and get the next breakout point, which is going to be just over here. So again, excuse, that's the main power for the starter cable. But you have this little section that breaks out over here. There's a couple of things going on here, so let's get through them. So first of all, you've got the section that's all taped up. That's from the original harness, and that's going to be your earthing point down there. Now, you will notice that there's a hole up there that takes an M6 bolt. Obviously, you wouldn't have this on a 1UZ VVT-i. This is only for the 3UZ. So your 1UZ earth straps are slightly longer because they reach the M8 hole over there. So again, on a 1UZ VVT-i engine, you wouldn't have this bolt, you wouldn't have this bolt, you would just have that one. Vice versa, on a 3UZ, you would have that bolt, but you wouldn't have these two bolts over here. Okay. Then what we've also done here now is, because the 6-speed has a completely different system with knock sensors, we've created a brand new sub-harness plug over there to an 8-pin DTM connector. And going underneath there, which I'm going to show you a photo of now, you'll see it goes down to the starter motor, and then it goes to the wideband knock sensors, because that is what you get on a 3UZ 6-speed. So you've got knock 1 and knock 2 over there. Right, so we've got earth sorted out. We've got the sub harness going out to the starter and the knock sensors over there. Next thing that's popping out over here is then going to be our gearbox harness. So you can see, obviously, we've created this all brand new, because obviously the 1UZ would not have come with a 6-speed automatic gearbox. But coming along and down there, we have our first breakout over here, which takes us to our input speed sensor. Now, the input speed sensor is on the left bank, down at the bottom, and it's actually facing upwards, so the plug goes down, does a 180, and plugs in over there. At the same point, we have the selector breaking out. Again, everything we do new is labeled. So that's the selector, and that's what it'll look like, okay, on the 6-speed automatic gearbox. And that goes down the right bank. So this long section you see here actually goes over the other side of the gearbox and plugs in over there. Then we have the harness that carries on along there, and we have another breakout over there, and then it goes to the solenoid. So again, you'll recognize it if you've seen the 3UZ 6-speed gearbox. It's a much more wires in that solenoid. And then we have our SP2, which is our output speed sensor. And again, that is just above the solenoid plug over there, also facing in this direction. So they just sort of go straight. The solenoid plug is obviously flat, and the speed sensor plug is like that over there. Okay, so, and nice and simple, there's only 4 plugs in total for the whole gearbox. Okay, all right. The last section that pops out over here, which you can see in the background over there where my finger is, comes along down through there. Try and move this out the way. And you can see it goes to the Lambda plug over there. So I'm going to pop down here so you can get a better view. But there's the Lambda plug over there. And again, I will say there is a metal shield that goes between the exhaust where this Lambda plug lives. Okay, please make sure you do install that heat shield. If you expose these plugs directly to the heat of the exhaust, they are not going to last at all. They're going to get brittle, they're going to crack. And obviously there's powers and grounds in there. So if they start disintegrating and touching, you're going to end up blowing fuses. Okay, so please make sure that you do put that heat shield in place when you come to fit everything in. Okay, right, so that is that section over there. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop over to the other side, and you'll see we've actually removed that plug that usually is in there. Pop over to the other side now, and let's carry on with the harness. Right, so moving over here. The harness carries on along the back over here, and then just down here, you'll see there's a little breakout here, and that goes to our second earthing point for the engine harness. And you'll see again, it bolts into the M8 hole. You won't have anything in the M6 hole if you have a 1UZ VVT-i engine, and obviously vice versa. 3UZ, 1UZ VVT-i, that's what those two are for. All right, moving along there, we then break out at the front over here of the plastic on the right bank now. So as I said, even cylinder numbers, so we're going to come out to injector 8 and coil 8. Then we're going to move along here, and the harness is going to break out here around injector 6. 3 things are going to come out here. We're going to have injector 6, we're going to have coil 6, and then we're going to have our ACIS plug. Okay, down in the description I have a good video where I actually pull apart the whole intake and show you how the ACIS system works. So I would advise you go and watch that. You'll have a good idea as to exactly why it's so important that it does work, because again, you lose a lot of low down power if it doesn't work. And the best time to test it is obviously when you pull the inlet manifold off to put the harness that goes underneath inside, okay? Obviously you don't want to put everything back together, fire up the car, and then find it doesn't work. Not ideal. And I'll show you in the test what we're looking for to determine whether the ACIS is working. But obviously when you're testing it, if you have a look here, we've got a white wire and a blue with a white tracer wire. White wire is 12 volts, blue with a white is ground. So you can take a car battery or whatever, supply 12 volts and ground to this plug over here. So 12 volts to the black, ground to the white. It might be different on your vehicle, but again, work on this plug over here because that is accurate. Okay, again, apply the 12 volts and ground. You should hear the solenoid click. It is polarity sensitive, so you have to get it around the right way. If you don't hear a click, time to replace it. And what better time when you've already got the inlet manifold off. All right, Then the harness carries on along here, and you'll see there is actually a mounting point, so you can use something like a P-clamp over there to keep this harness nice and in place. Over here, we break out again into 3 sections. We go to the cam sensor, so that's number 3 of 3. This is for the right inlet cam, or VVR as it's sometimes called. Then we have injector 4 and we have coil 4. Then the harness comes along to the front over here, and then it has a breakout, and this has quite a few sections, so let's start going through them. So first of all, we've got injector 2 and coil 2, nice and simple. Now what we've done is, because of the throttle body has to change, because again a 3UZ is a full drive-by-wire system and not a hybrid like the 1UZ VVT-i, which still had an accelerator cable, we've had to obviously change the throttle plug over there. So we've done what we normally do with our brand new 3UZ harnesses, and we've added this all in. So that means the customer who does have a 6-speed throttle could change it to a 5-speed throttle in a pinch if he couldn't get hold of a 6-speed one. Also coming out here is going to be our coolant temperature sensor for the ECU, okay? And what we have done is we've added in a temp sensor, which will make more sense when I go through the 9-pin plug over there. You'll see we've taken that wire and we've brought it inside the vehicle so you guys can use it to fit your own temperature sensor. Now you can see I've got one in there. That's not standard. Your 1UZ VVT-i or 3UZ VVT-i would not come with that unless you had a Crown 1UZ VVT-i, which did come with this in. And that's why this hole is still here in the casting. You can actually remove that. There is a threaded hole there, and it will actually fit a 1UZ non-VVT-i single wire coolant temperature sensor, which is pretty much exactly what I have in there. And that's the one that I use for testing. Now, I normally advise people, get the correct sensor that's going to work for your gauge. So if you have a Ford, a BMW, a Volvo, and your vehicle actually had a dedicated temperature sensor for your gauge, get that sensor and fit it in there. That is your best option, because you don't need to worry about calibrations or anything like that. And obviously the fact that you're taking the temperature from the exact same place as the ECU is, it's got to be good news. There's a reason Toyota put a temperature sensor there and not anywhere else in the engine. Okay. Also coming out there, we then have our oil control valve for the right bank again. And then lastly coming out there is going to be our mass airflow sensor, okay? Now what we have done is we have kept it to work with the 1UZ VVT-i sensor, mass airflow sensor, but this can be changed around to work with the 3UZ sensor if required, and the customer could always give us a call and we'll talk him through that process, okay? Right, so that is that. Now then, the harness is going to carry on down through here. And again, you'll see another section that we've added in, and that is for the alternator. And that obviously goes into your 3-pin plug over there. And lastly, we carry on down through here and we end up at our Lambda sensor plug. So that is basically the end of the harness. There should be a bracket here normally that holds it in. That's what that clip is for over there. But that's it, basically. That is the entire harness. The only other things that needed to be added on is obviously your main power for your alternator, which I would advise you take to some sort of fuse in the vehicle. Toyota usually uses 120 amp fuse, but again, that depends on your vehicle and what sort of electrical load you are expecting to see. The other one is obviously the main starter cable, which is this thick one that comes through there. It's now separate from obviously the sub harness that goes to the NOx sensors and the actual plug that goes to the starter solenoid, but you still need to fit that in and obviously customize it to your particular setup. So other than those two cables, the rest of the harness plugs straight in. Obviously, you do have your earths. Now, normally what I would advise people to do, I've obviously mounted an earth to the block over here. That's my main thick earth, if you want to call it that. That one then obviously supplies the ground for the starter motor, because again, the starter motor is bolted to the block. And what I normally advise people to do is either pick the second hole, because remember, you're only going to use one of these holes depending on what engine and harness you've got. But use the other one to put an earth strap from here to the firewall over there. It doesn't hurt, and obviously with Toyotas, you can never really have too many earths, I'm afraid. So yeah, I always advise the earth from the cylinder head to the firewall and from the block, usually to the chassis or the negative of the battery, or sometimes directly to the negative of the battery. Again, that depends on your setup, but you need a bare minimum of those two to make sure everything is okay. Right, so as I said, now what we're going to do is we're going to come back and we're going to look at these two client plugs over here as to what they're going to be installing in their vehicle. All right, so we've got our 9-pin plug, which if you watched any of our other videos is going to be incredibly similar to you. Obviously, we try and keep that on every single harness that we do. It makes it really nice and easy when people are asking us what does what on the phone if they haven't got the documentation in front of them. Okay. Then we have the 12-pin plug, because this is an auto, so it's basically got a bunch of the automatic gearbox stuff in it, as well as the OBD2 connector, okay? All right, so let's start with the 9-pin plug. So we have our red. Now again, I've taken that out. but again, it's a red 14 gauge wire in there. That is the power for the entire system. Now that does require a permanent 12 volt supply, okay? Now I do understand that certain vehicles are racing vehicles and you have what they call cutoff switches. It's perfectly fine to connect it after the cutoff switch, but what you don't want to do is you don't want to connect it to the ignition switch. So in other words, every time you turn the key off, the ECU turns off. If you're disconnecting the battery with the safety switch, that's absolutely fine. Don't stress about that at all. But basically, don't use it on an ignition feed because the ECU does store data, stores diagnostic codes, which is the most important part. And if you connect the ECU to an ignition supply, every time you turn the key off, the ECU is going to reset. It's not going to store any codes. It's going to make diagnosing an absolute nightmare. So two options. One, either connect it to a permanent 12 volt supply if you don't have a battery cutoff in your vehicle. If you do have a battery cutoff in your vehicle, perfectly fine to connect that to the other side of the battery cutoff. So it will be cut off with the battery cutoff. There's not a problem with that at all. But don't connect it to an ignition source that every time you turn the key or the ignition switch on and off, that the ECU is going to shut down and completely reset every single time. Okay. Number two is going to be black with a yellow. So that's this one over here. And that is your starter signal. Now that does require a 12 volts. So again, we do that because most of the time you guys are going to be using some sort of key barrel ignition system. So that's what you're going to get at the back of a key barrel ignition system. So you can either connect it to your key barrel, you can connect it to a switch if you want to have like a push button start. Again, 12 volts to one side, the other side to the black with the yellow tracer wire on. Number three is yellow with a green, and that's this one over here. And again, that is the gauge temp, or I call it gauge temp, and that's the one that comes to this wire over here that is labeled as temp, okay? The one for you guys to install your own coolant temperature sensor. If you don't need that or use that, it's absolutely no problem at all. You can leave it blank. It's just we put it in there to make it easier for you guys to do that, okay? Number four is going to be gray, and that's going to be fuel pump. So again, this is a 16 gauge gray wire. Obviously, I've removed it because I've got it connected to our fuel pump over here. And basically, it's all controlled via the ECU and the fuse box. The relay is in there for the fuel pump. I do actually have a description down in the description below. I have a video on the fuel systems and how they work with a good explanation as to exactly what goes on with them, how they are controlled, whether it's ECU or somewhere else. And in this case, it is ECU controlled. So I do advise you go watch that because usually basically it doesn't prime the system. And that's where a lot of people get caught out. They go in, they wire it up, they turn the key and they're like, oh, the pump's not priming. That is perfectly normal. The pump will only run when it detects engine movement, or in other words, a crank sensor signal, and it'll keep running until it obviously detects no crank signal. It'll also come on when you crank the key. So it's got to start a signal that goes to the ECU to tell it that you're cranking, and it activates the pump under those two conditions, okay? So again, it's not going to prime. Please be aware of that. I do get a lot of phone calls of that situation where they wire everything up and they say, oh, it doesn't prime, and that's perfectly normal. That's how Toyota use it. But do go down, watch that video. A lot of useful information there for you guys. Okay. Next up is going to be yellow with a red tracer, and that's that one over there. And that is going to be our check engine light. So what we do with our systems is we do have a little LED in there that also acts as a check engine light, but obviously this tends to be put away. So we give you a wire that you can take to your dash, or you can take to an LED if you've got like a completely custom dash. Take it to an LED, it'll give you the check engine light so you can see when that pops up. You can plug in your OBD2 machine, check what the code is, and resolve the issue. Now, that check engine light does give out a ground/earth, depending on what part of the world you're in, what terminology you use, but basically it gives a ground or an earth. So if you are using an LED, just connect 12 volts to the 12 volt side of the LED and connect our yellow with the red to the ground side of the LED, and there's your check engine light. Next up is number 6, and that's going to be a solid yellow color. It's that one over there. Now that is your tacho signal, tachometer, rev counter, whatever you call it. But that is the signal coming from the ECU that gives you a rev counter signal. Now, although it's a V8, they do give out a 4-cylinder signal. Okay, so do bear that in mind when you're looking at what tacho you want to use. Make sure that it is capable of reading a 4-cylinder signal if you are fitting an aftermarket one. All right. Now, in this case, you'll see my check engine light and tacho are connected to the dash, and that's what we're going to use to test to make sure that everything is working as we expect it to. Next up is black with a red. So that's this one over here. And that is our ignition switch. So that's the speed that turns everything on. Obviously, the permanent 12 volt supply doesn't turn anything on, the red one. It just supplies the power to control everything once it gets turned on. So the black with the red needs an ignition 12 volts. Now, what I would say is do be careful when you are using an ignition barrel, okay? Because the ignition barrels have a couple of positions. Obviously off, then you have accessory, then you have ignition, then you have start, okay? Now, the reason that's important is because accessory feed loses its 12 volts when the key is moved to the start position. Ignition doesn't, but accessory does. That's why when you turn to go and crank the car over, you'll see sometimes radios turn off, etc., etc. That's why they're connected to the accessory 12 volt feed. Now, if you connect our fuse box to your accessory feed, what's going to happen is every time you go to start the car, you're effectively going to shut down the whole system and turn everything off, okay? And you won't notice it because usually when you're cranking, like the check engine light goes off, it's going to do the exact same thing. And every time you let go of the key and go back to the ignition position, well, guess what? The whole system's going to power back up again. You're going to be left scratching your head thinking, what is going on? You're going to jump in, turn the key, it doesn't start, come back, have a look and go, everything is on. My check engine light's on, everything is on. So please make sure when you are using a key barrel that if you are looking for the ignition 12 volts, find a wire, use your multimeter, check that it's got 12 volts, then move the key to the start position and make sure that 12 volts stays and doesn't fall away, okay? That's your accessory feed if it does. The other one that doesn't, that's the one you want to connect to that black with a red wire. All right. Next up is number 8, and that is going to be pink with a blue. So that's here, all right? And that is your charge light, alternator light, battery light, whatever you want to call it. But that is the one that tells you whether your alternator is working or not, okay? Now, same with the check engine light, that does give out a ground signal. So again, if you're using your dash, that's usually how most dashes work. So you can connect it directly to the dash on the alternator light side. If you're going to use the LED, you want to connect ignition 12 volts to the 12 volt side and the pink with the blue to the negative side of the LED. All right. Now then, for guys that are using older vehicles, things that I have noticed on the older dashes, usually with the incandescent bulbs, not with the LEDs because they wouldn't have come with LEDs. But I have noticed on some dashes, they will backfeed through the pink with the blue wire and then backfeed into the alternator. And the alternator has an ignition feed, which then feeds back into the system and causes the fuse box to stay on even when you turn the key off, okay? So if you have an old dash, I would advise two things. Number one, either you replace the bulb with an LED bulb because the LED is a light emitting diode, so it doesn't allow electricity to backfeed. If you can't get an LED for your dash, then use a diode in the back there to stop any sort of backfeeding, okay? Right, next up, number 9, that's our last one, is going to be yellow with the black, and that's next to our pink with the blue over there. Again, we're using this device to give us all our signals on the dash to make sure that they work. And that is going to be your oil pressure switch. So that's the one that's connected to this switch over here. Again, it's just the usual oil light you would get with every vehicle over there, and exactly the same as the check engine or the battery light. It does give out a ground signal. Obviously, it grounds through the block where it's screwed into. And so again, you can take that either directly to your dash or to an LED if you want to fit that, if you've got a custom dash. Now, again, you don't have to worry about any type of backfeeding. It's just connected via earth to the block. So there's no worries there whatsoever. It's only the alternator light that you need to worry about with that particular setup. Okay. Now then, moving on to this plug over here. This is going to be the one with the OBD2 plug-in. So as you see here, again, every customer gets these with their harness. You'll see pin 1, pin 4, pin 7, 8, and 11 are for the OBD2 connector. All right, so those, you don't need to worry about those at all. They go straight to an OBD2 connector. You just need to know that it's there so you can plug in your machine and you can do diagnostics. Okay, so let's start from the top here. We've got number 2, which is going to be white with a blue. So you can see that one over there. Just pull them out here. So that is your white with the blue, and that is your brake switch. Okay, so that wire needs 12 volts when you press the brakes. Okay, now the Toyota ran a 4-wire switch because they wanted to know when the brakes were both pressed and not pressed. We take care of that inside the fuse box, so you don't have to worry about that. All you need to worry about is making sure that this gets 12 volts when the brakes are pressed. So you can connect it to the brake light circuit, if you will. You can connect it to your switch, but it does need to have a 12 volts, okay? Because that's obviously usually what you're going to connect to. Usually guys will be connected to their brake light circuit, okay? So again, super simple. Next up is number 3, and that is going to be a straightforward orange one, which you can see over there. Now that is going to be shift down, okay? Remember, this is going to be using a 6-speed 3UZ gearbox, so it does have the Tiptronic function, so we can shift up and down through the gears. Now, the shift down as well as the shift up, which is the yellow one over there, they require a ground signal, okay? Ground / earth, whatever you want to call it. But again, you need to give them a ground via a button. So whether you're using a shifter that has like a sideways motion and a plus and a minus, whether you're using a steering wheel with buttons on, whatever you're using, you just need to make sure that it gets a ground signal for the shift up and shift down. And I am emphasizing that because the way that you put it into manual mode requires a 12 volts. Okay, so please don't get them mixed up. The shift up, shift down button requires a ground. The going into manual mode requires a 12 volts. Okay, but we'll get to that in a minute. Number 5 is going to be red with a yellow tracer. So that's that one over there. And that's going to be CCS, which stands for Cruise Control Switch. Now, as per usual with all of these ones, when you keep the automatic gearbox, you keep the ECU having a speed signal, so therefore we can retain the cruise control. All right. Now, if you want to retain the cruise control, it's really simple. The easiest way to do it is to pick up a Toyota or Lexus cruise control switch from anything from about 98 onwards. So it could be from an IS 200, it could be from an LS 430. It could even be from like Toyota Camry if you wanted to be honest with you. Whatever had a little stalk that sticks out the side there. And it's only 2 wires to connect, so it's really simple if you use that switch. One side of the wire has earth, and the other side goes directly to our cruise control switch, which is the red with the yellow one. If you don't want to use it, don't connect it. It's no problems at all, okay? Again, 6 is yellow shift up. We've already been through that, okay? Then next up, we've got number 9, which is black with a red tracer. So that's that one over there, right? And that is your reverse light. So again, that's going to provide the 12 volts that you can take to your reverse lights at the back of the vehicle, because again, the reverse signal is coming from the selector, which is built into the harness. So we give you the reverse lights to connect to your vehicle. Next up, number 10 is going to be blue with a red tracer. So you can see that over there, blue with a red. And that is going to be your manual / sport mode. Basically what I said earlier is that requires a 12 volts. So if you've seen a shifter from an LS 436 speed, so like 03 to 05, or like an IS 300 or a GS 300 like 2001 to 2005, you'll see the way the shifter worked was it went park, reverse, neutral, drive, and then it went boom to manual mode. Okay, so obviously in the original selector there was just a micro switch, pop, and then it would be supplying 12 volts to the blue with the red wire, which then goes to the ECU and puts it into manual mode, which then allows you to use the shift up, shift down functionality. Okay. And then lastly, something that only applies to European vehicles is going to be a solid white wire, which is that one you see over there. And that is your kick down switch. So again, guys, please be wary. It doesn't apply to Japanese vehicles. It doesn't apply to US vehicles. It only applies to European vehicles. Why? I have no idea. Lexus decided that all the 3UZs in Europe needed to have a kick down switch, but not the Americans or the Japanese or any other country for that matter. I don't know why we require a kick down switch and they don't, but that's their decision, not mine. But that is that one over there, okay? Right, so those are the 2 plugs that you need to connect into your vehicle. So you can see we make it super simple for you guys. We take care of pretty much everything inside the fuse box there, and we give you very simple connections on your side, okay? I do go through every single connection in here. This obviously gets emailed as a PDF to every single customer, along with the complete fuse box layout, what each fuse does, what each relay does, so that they know if they ever need to replace a fuse, they know what size, etc. And if they're doing a diagnosis, they know which fuse is blowing. And obviously we like to separate everything. So we separate injectors, we separate coils, we separate the alternator, we separate everything. So when you are blowing fuses, you can kind of pinpoint exactly what's causing the problem almost immediately. Okay. Right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get everything ready. We're then going to pop back. We're going to do the testing with the ignition on, and then we're going to do the testing with the engine actually running. So, see you in a second. Right, guys, so we are back now. We're going to be doing the testing. And as I said, it's made up of 2 sections, one with just the ignition on and one with the engine running. So, first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go through all the tests we're going to carry out, and we'll jump into the one with the ignition on. So, let's go over to our testing sheet over here. So, first thing is the ignition on, that's that section over there, and with the engine running, relatively straightforward. So first with the ignition on, we want to make sure the check engine light works. So what we're going to be looking for is the LED on here and the light on the dash. Now I must warn you, this is a 3UZ 6-speed, so the check engine light on the dash is going to be dim. That's because these do not work with incandescent bulbs. They don't give enough power, so they shine quite dim, so you have to replace it with the LED. Obviously, if you are putting a check engine light in your vehicle, either replace the bulb with an LED one, or if you're going to fit your own LED, then it's absolutely fine. And as you'll see per the LED here, it's fine and bright as long as it's an LED. Okay, Then we're going to check the charge light and the oil pressure light. So what I'm looking for is, well, that one over there and that one over there, okay, to make sure they come up and light up, which they are. What we'll also do is when we come to run the engine, we want to make sure that those go off and on. And when we're doing the testing here, I'm actually going to unplug each one and show you that the correct light's going off and then the correct light's coming on again, okay. Then we're going to go to the OBD2 test. Basically, all I want to do is make sure that it communicates with the machine. That's all I'm looking for in that particular test. Then I'm going to activate the fuel pump relay with the OBD2 machine. So you're going to hear it click, you're going to hear the fuel pump turn on, and obviously as I turn it off, it's going to turn off. Then what we're going to do is we're going to test the brake switch. So we're going to supply the white with the blue wire with 12 volts. Then you're going to hear the relay click. On the machine here, we're going to go over the stop light switch, and we're going to see it's going to go from off to on and back to off again when I let it go. Then we're going to do the gear selector. It's quite a long one. Basically, what we want to do is make sure that the gear positions are all correct. So we're going to make sure that it's when it's in park, the ECU sees park. When it's in neutral, the ECU is in neutral. And when it sees reverse and drive, that the ECU sees those correct signals. We're then also going to test the shift up, shift down, and the sport mode to make sure that those are working correctly. Okay, so that's with the ignition on. Then what we're going to do is we're going to look at the starter circuit. So that's going to be basically testing the neutral start switch, because as it's an auto, we do wire it up as per normal auto. So the vehicle will not start unless it's in park or neutral. And we'll make sure of that by moving the selector from park to reverse. Try and start it by touching the black with the yellow wire with 12 volts. Nothing will happen. We'll move it back to park, and then obviously we'll touch the black with the yellow with 12 volts. The engine's going to crank over and it's going to start. Once that's happened, we're going to go over and check the ACIS, or acoustic control induction system. Basically what we're looking for is this little valve here, which you can see there is going to be in that position, and it does that a few seconds after it starts. Okay, so we want to make sure by the time we started it, we come over here, this is obviously moved down to that position. Then we're going to do the drive-by-wire test, which is basically I'm going to press the pedal and I'm going to rev the engine. Simple as that, just making sure that everything is working. Because as you know, it's a full drive-by-wire system. It's got no cables or accelerator cables whatsoever to it. So as soon as I touch the pedal, the engine should rev, and then we know everything is okay. Then we're going to test the oil control valves, and that we're going to be doing with our machine. Basically what's going to happen is it's going to advance and retard the cams. It's going to sound like a lumpy cam engine. And when I turn it off, it's going to go back to running smooth as it should do. Okay. Then we're going to go over and test the injectors and coils. And what I'm basically going to do is I'm effectively going to unplug each injector one by one. And then we're going to hear the engine misfire. And as I put it back, hear it running smooth again. That's making sure that every single cylinder is firing correctly. Now, I don't disconnect the coils, because on the 3UZs, what they tend to do is if they pick up a misfire on the coil via the ignition feedback signal, they'll actually shut the injector down. It's a safe procedure. Obviously, you don't want fuel to be injected into a cylinder that's no longer sparking. So obviously, I just disconnect the injectors, and then as soon as I put it back, it'll go back to running smooth. If I disconnected the coils, it would slowly but surely run all the cylinders down, and we'd end up killing the engine by the time we got to probably number 6 or maybe even number 5. Right, so that's the injectors. Then we'll come back and we'll look at the tacho on our gauge here, make sure that we are seeing RPM through there correctly. We'll also come back and we'll look at the coolant temperature gauge down here. As I said, I have connected our temperature sensor here to our little device that translates MPX to work on that cluster over there. I've also connected the temp gauge on the engine, so we should be seeing some coolant temperature, and you'll see before I do the running test, I'll let the engine run for a bit to get the coolant temperature up enough that we can actually see that coming through there. Then lastly, we're going to go through diagnostics, what you can do, what you can't do. Obviously, we'll make sure that any codes that are on there are only relevant, because obviously things like we haven't got the solenoid connected up or anything like that. But we'll make sure everything on the engine side is okay. So remember, with the 3UZ 6-speed, they actually split the transmission and engine into separate controls within the ECU. It doesn't require a second ECU, but you'll see here when I go through the machine, I actually need to choose whether it's engine or electronically controlled transmission that I need to go through. Okay. So that's pretty much all the testing we're going to be doing today. So let's start off by putting the ignition on and going through the rest of it. So as I said, we're taking our black with a red wire over there, and we're going to supply it with 12 volts. So let me do that now. As I do that, you can hear everything is clicking away, a bunch of relays clicking in the fuse box there. You can see now we've got our check engine light on there, and unfortunately very dimly lit, but we do have our check engine light on there as well. We already had the oil and the battery light on. It's just the way the device works over there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go unplug the oil. We'll see the oil light go off, and then I'll plug it back in again, and we'll see the oil light come on. So you can see the oil light has gone off. Plug it back in again. oil light has come back on. Let me go test the alternator quickly. So all of that wiring is related in this 3-pin plug over here. So I'm going to take that out. Okay. Pop back and you can see our alternator light has turned off. And we pop around here and plug this back in again. And fingers crossed, we should see the alternator light back on again. There you go, fantastic, okay. Right, so OBD2 test, what I'm going to do to show you that it is actually reading information is obviously pop in here. These things take ages to load up, so I kind of preloaded for you. But what I'll do is I'll go into function, I'll go into system select, and you'll see it picks it up as an LS430. And as I said now, instead of having these two together, they're actually separate. So I'm going to go into engine for now, because that's what we want to do first of all. And we're going to go into the data list, and you should see we're going to start seeing things like throttle position, coolant temp, etc. So there is our coolant temperature, there is our MAF load, but again, I've actually got the MAF unplugged for now, but we have got battery voltage, we've got a whole bunch of information here that is live, so that's absolutely perfect. Okay, right, so first thing we want to do is do the fuel pump. So we're going to go into active test. I do apologize, the sun is shining through there, hopefully you can still see this. But we're going to go into fuel pump. And again, if you want to make sure how they work, please, in the description below, I've got a good video showing you how the fuel pumps work. And now that we're into that, I'm going to quickly turn the fuel pump on. Hopefully you hear the relay click there and you can hear the pump whirring away. Flick that off and you can hear the relay click and the pump has stopped whirring away there. Okay, fantastic. Right, now then, what we want to do is we want to go into the data list because we want to test the brake light switch and the gear selector. Okay, so we want to see all of that information. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to now create a new custom list to get rid of all of the data that we don't need. So let's get rid of that. Let's just put engine speed in, coolant temp. And what do we want? We want to have the park neutral switch and the stop switch. So let's find those. Let's go down, down, down. And then we've got neutral position switch. We don't need the stop light switch. There you go. Right, so we'll just get that piece of information so it doesn't take ages to load. But you'll see now we've got the neutral position switch signal is on because obviously the vehicle's in park. Remember, the ECU doesn't really differentiate in the data between park and neutral. Okay, but at the moment our stop light switch is off, so that's what we're going to test first of all. So all I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my white with the blue and I'm going to supply it with 12 volts. And as I do, you know, the relay click, stop light switch goes to on, I let it go, stop light switch goes to off. Okay, perfect. That's exactly what I want to do. There is two signals coming in. Obviously it knows when the brake's not pressed and when it's pressed, and that's for the cruise control system. So that's all taken care of inside the relay. All I want to do is make sure when I touch that it activates, and then I can see that the stop light switch is turning on. Also bear in mind, this is not actually going to the ECU, this is just activating the relay. So all the power is going to the ECU for the stop light switch are actually fused separately in there. So you can't do any damage to the ECU if this circuit gets overloaded, okay? Right, so that's that. So now we're going to move over to the gear selector. So as I said, we're going to checking for when it's in park, that it knows it's in park. When it's in neutral, it knows that it's in neutral. As I said, the ECU doesn't differentiate between park and neutral. What it does is it refers to it as the park neutral switch, okay? Now, please guys, bear in mind, I do have a video on park neutral switches and how they work. There are two completely separate circuits. There is the park neutral switch that works for the starter relay, and then there's the park signal and the neutral signal that the ECU receives. Again, two completely different circuits altogether. But in that video, I do explain it in great detail. So please do go and watch that so you can understand exactly how it's working. Obviously in our harnesses, it is all wired correctly. It's not something you need to worry about, but if extra information, if you guys want, really good to go and watch that. So as I said, at the moment, the selector is in park. So it's showing that the neutral position switch signal is on. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to move this over here, and I'm going to move it from park to reverse. So it's going to be that way. So I'll move it to reverse, and you'll see now the neutral position switch is off. Okay. I'm going to move it from reverse to neutral, and let's wiggle that around. Yeah. And then you can see the neutral switch is now on, and I'm going to move it down to drive, and you see the neutral position switch is off. So remember, with the 6-speed gearboxes, they do not have all the other positions. They only have park, reverse, neutral, and drive. They then moved sideways to sport/manual mode. and then you could use the Tiptronic to go up and down the gears. Okay, so just bear that in mind. Although the selector switches are the same as the 5-speed ones, there is only physically 4 positions that it can be in. Okay, and you can notice that by the fact that there's a lot of missing wires versus a 5-speed in the top there. Okay, now we're going to put it back to park. We've got the park on there. And what I want you to notice as well, just while I'm here, I moved it from park to reverse. You hear the click, and I'll move it to neutral. Wait for the click. Okay. Now, what I want you to notice is I'm just going to gently wiggle the switch, and you can see it goes from on to off, on to off, on to off. Okay. Now, that's super important because basically what that means is that these switches have an elongated hole over here. And the reason that is that these can be adjusted ever so slightly. So what I always advise customers to do, especially with automatics, okay, well, only with automatics, but is to make sure that you actually are getting the correct gear information at all times, okay? So basically in this case, what you would have to do, okay, is you'd have to have a diagnostic machine. You'd have to basically plug that in, okay? And what you'd be doing is exactly what I'm doing here. You're looking at what gear position there is. So in the engine functions, you can only see the park neutral switch. You can't see reverse and drive, okay? In the gearbox section, you can see reverse and drive, okay, which is what we're going to switch over to now to do the rest of the gear positions, including the shift up, shift down, and the manual sports mode, right? Now, what I advise you do is put it into drive, and then in a safe environment, not breaking any laws, just boot the accelerator, all right? That's gonna put the engine under maximum torque, under maximum torsion. And if the engine is gonna twist and that is going to move in any shape or form, that is the time that it's gonna do it. So make sure that when you boot it, that signal to the ECU remains solid throughout. When you're accelerating, when you're braking, etc. If not, unbolt that bolt, slightly adjust the switch, bolt it back down again, do the same test over again until you see that it stays in the correct signal, okay? The ECU doesn't like to be in that middle ground where it's receiving no signals whatsoever. Obviously, it freaks out thinking something's gone horribly wrong. Okay, so please, as part of the installation, make sure that those signals are correct that you are getting from the gearbox selector, okay? So, as I said, now what we're gonna have to do is go over to the gearbox section, as you saw in the beginning there. So we're gonna go over to System Select. We're going to go over to ECT, which is Electronically Controlled Transmission. And what we're going to do now is go into the data list. Again, I'm going to select the relevant information because obviously there is a lot of information that they give you and these old things don't communicate that fast. So we'll go into New Custom List. We will remove all of the existing data. Let's just grab that. Just grab that. Okay, so what we want now is not the stoplight switch. We want to know when it is, there you go, so shift switch status, sports shift up, sports shift down, and then we want to know sports mode selected. Okay, so that's going to give us pretty much all that we need to know for now. Right, so you can see here that I've got the R range, that's going to be an R. So let me, oh, you know what, I apologize. I didn't put drive in there for a second. So let's just find drive. So we got selector, switch, drive. Where was the other ones? R, and then we've got there, drive. Fantastic. Apologize about that. Right, so now we're going to be able to see when we're in drive, when we're in reverse, whether we're shifting up, whether we're shifting down, and when we are in the actual sports mode. So let's start with the first one. So after park, we have reverse. So I'll put that into reverse. And you'll see, I'm in the other one, I'm in neutral, sorry. Park, let's go to reverse. And you'll see now reverse is on. I'm gonna go to neutral, that turns off, and I'm gonna go to drive, and drive turns on. Okay, so that's gravy. All of the signals coming from there are exactly what I expect them to be. We've got park, reverse, neutral, and drive. Right, so let's move on to the sports mode / manual mode. So as I said, that is going to be our blue with the red wire, and it needs 12 volts. So I'm going to take my blue with the red wire. I'm going to provide it with 12 volts, and as I do, you're going to see sports mode selection switch is on, and as I let it go, it turns off. Okay, right, so now what we want to do is we want to do the shift up and shift down. So first of all, we go up to here. We've got shift up is yellow. Again, that needs to be supplied with a ground, so I'm going to use the ground for the OBD2 connector, which should be there. Give me a second. Come on. Just use the ground for the OBD2. There you go. So again, shift up, which is my yellow one, is now on because I've given it a ground from the OBD2 connector. And as I pull it out, it's gone off. Right, let's move to now shift down, which is going to be my orange wire. So again, I'm going to pop that into the OBD2 connector, and you'll see shift down is on, and I've put the orange wire into the ground for that. And as I take it out, it goes back to off again. Fantastic. Okay, so super happy with that. All of our gear positions work. We know that our sports mode works if you supply it with 12 volts. We know the shift up works, and we know the shift down works, and we know the brake switch works. So everything in relation to the gearbox is absolutely spot on. Okay, right. So that is all the testing with the ignition on now. I'm going to close the blind behind me there so the light's not shining on the paper. I'm going to let the engine warm up for a little bit. I'm going to pop back and we'll do the test with the engine running. So see you guys in a second. Right guys, now we're back for the testing with the engine actually running. So what I'm going to do is a quick recap of what we're going to do. We're going to jump in and then we are going to rock and roll. Okay, so first of all, we're going to test the starter circuit. So we're going to make sure that the neutral start switch is working as we expect it to. I'm going to move it from park to reverse. We're going to try and start it. It won't start. I'm going to move it back into park. We're going to start her up. Okay, ACIS, we're just going to make sure that this little valve over here goes like that after it starts. Perfect. Drive-by-wire test, I'm just literally going to come and rev the engine with the accelerator pedal, make sure that's working. We're then going to pop over to the machine and test the oil control valves, okay? Again, it'll make the engine run lumpy. That's what we expect to see. So it'll run lumpy, I'll turn it off, it'll go back to running smooth. And we're going to do both banks, bank 1 and then bank 2, okay? Then we're going to go around and we're going to unplug each of the injectors one by one. I can actually test each cylinder with the machine, but it's just more cumbersome to do that. So I'm going to unplug the injector one by one. Then we'll come back and we'll make sure that our tacho is working, that we're getting a tachometer signal. You can see we already got some coolant temperature through there, so hopefully that might rise a little bit. I think it's about 60 degrees, the engine now. Then we'll come back and we'll do the diagnostics and show you exactly what's going on there. Right, so I'm gonna get my ear defenders all lined up. So first thing I'm gonna do is make sure that I'm in park. I'm gonna move it to reverse. I'm gonna grab my black with the yellow one. I'm gonna touch it on 12 volts. And you can see we've got absolutely nothing going on there. I'm going to move it back to park, and in 3, 2, 1. There you go. So super happy with that. Let's move over to our ACIS valve. And as you can see, that has now moved down. So again, absolutely happy with that. That's perfect. Right, let's move over to the drive-by-wire test. So again, I'm just going to give it a VVT-i control system bank 1, enter. Let's go into number 2. So we're going to go VVT-i control system bank 2, enter. Right, super happy with that. Let's just pop in here and then we'll just choose something else. Right, okay, moving over, we're going to go into the injectors and coils. So I'm going to start here on this side and then we're going to go over to the other side. So starting with cylinder number 1. Cylinder number 3. Cylinder number 5. Cylinder number 7. Okay. Right, then we're going to have cylinder number 8. Cylinder number 6. Cylinder number 4. And then cylinder number 2. Fantastic. Okay, so that's working 100%. Right, Right, then we're going to go over to our tacho, and you can see we've got a signal there. Working 100%. Coolant temp, well, it's still up there. You can see we are now about sort of 76 degrees on the coolant temperature there. Okay, so I'm going to quickly kill the motor. Take off my air defenders over there. Let's put the ignition back on again. If I can get it in. Right, single-handedly, super difficult. Right, you stay there. Okay, so ignition is back on again. Now, as I said, the way the system works in terms of like actually doing diagnostics with this particular machine with the 6 speeds, it now splits them up into 2 sections. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into system select. And what we're going to do is we're going to go look at the engine error codes, and you'll see that we have no error codes in relation to the engine because it's all been mapped ready to work. Okay, so we've got absolutely 0 codes in relation to the engine. If I go over and I go system select and now I pick transmission, we should have some codes. And as you saw, the check engine light did stay on when we were running because obviously we've got gearbox codes because things aren't plugged in. So as you can see here, we've got solenoid A, B, and D, and obviously that's only in relation to the fact that the solenoid plug is not plugged in. We've got the selector and everything plugged in, so all of those signals are all okay. But obviously we have some solenoid codes because the solenoid is not plugged in. But more importantly, we don't have any other codes, which is absolutely perfect in what we're looking for. Okay, right, so in terms of diagnostics, right, so you do need to plug in an OBD2 machine. All right, that's the starters. You cannot do the old flash code system or whatever to get codes via the check engine light. That doesn't work with the 3UZ 6 speeds. You are going to need some form of diagnostics machine. These 3UZ 6 speed ECUs are CAN based. Okay, so when you're looking for a diagnostics machine, make sure it can work with the CAN based system, which is pretty much every modern vehicle. So if you get one of those Bluetooth devices, it should work absolutely fine. All right. The check engine light should only come on when you have an actual error. So obviously we've mapped out all the evap, we've mapped out the secondary Lambda sensors, we've mapped all of that stuff out. So the only time you get an actual check engine light, there will be a problem with the engine that needs resolving. So that's also the important part. Same thing applies to the gearbox. If you've got a check engine light, there is something wrong, you do need to get that looked at and rectified and read the codes to see exactly what it is, okay? Which obviously brings us to my obvious point is that check the codes first. Before you do anything, check the codes. And I do have a video where I go through how I do a diagnostic procedure on an engine. So again, in the description, you can have a look at that. I know it applies only to a 1UZ non-VVT-i, but the principles I go through apply across the board. Okay, so again, do watch that if you're doing diagnosis. It will help you in that regard. And remember, don't connect that red wire to an ignition source, because if you do, you're going to keep wiping the codes every time you turn the key off, okay? And that is going to make your life incredibly frustrating. So I will say that again, permanent 12 volts or on this side of a battery isolator, but the only reason you disconnect the battery isolator is if you're cutting power to the whole vehicle, in which case it wouldn't matter. But every time you turn the ignition on and off and on and off and on and off, you still want that red wire to have permanent 12 volt supply, okay? Right, so diagnostics, you need a machine. There's no way around it. You need a machine to read the codes and go from there. This will work with TechStream. It will work with probably most of those Bluetooth dongles. Obviously, I don't have a list of every single one. I haven't tried every single one. This is this little handheld in Toyota intelligent tester that basically replicates TechStream. But yeah, you can get TechStream on a laptop and you can plug in, everything will work. You can take it to a Toyota dealership and they can plug it in and everything will work and they'll be able to use TechStream to look at it, okay? Right, so that's that. And then obviously I do still put the wire in that you can bridge. And the reason I do that is nothing to do with diagnosis in terms of actually reading codes. But if you follow the rules of an OBD2 connector, you'll see that this pin on the outside here, which is 13, and the one above it, which is pin 5 is ground, and 13 is TC for trouble codes. Now, the reason I still put it in is because you can still bridge those two terminals and you can still check timing, okay? So if you have a look over here, you'll see we've got 0, 5, 10, and 15 degrees. And if you look at my crank pulley, hopefully we can see it, but I have actually used a bit of Tipex correction fluid or whatever on there. You can't see it now, but there's a mark on the crank that I've used white Tipex correction fluid to make it really visible. And what you can do, if you're lucky like me and you have a timing light that works just being wrapped around the wires, you can wrap around the wires, bridge pin 5 and 13 on that OBD2 plug over there, and you will lock the timing at 10 degrees, and in which case you can check the timing before you even start pulling the covers off. If you are suspecting that the timing is slightly out, that's a really good way to check, okay? Now, the caveat with that is, don't leave a wire plugged in there. If you do, you're going to lock the timing at 10 degrees, and therefore you're not going to have a fun time, because obviously you're going to have no power. Okay, so if you are testing and checking for timing, you can bridge those two wires in there. You can check the timing, but check the timing, make sure it's okay, and then go and remove the paper clip, hair clip, piece of wire, whatever you use. Just go and remove it from there so you don't leave it in there by mistake. Okay, but that's pretty much it for this harness over here. Like I said, it is a bit of a weird one. Like I said, we have mashed basically a 1UZ and a 3UZ together and made it all work with a 6-speed automatic gearbox. So if you guys are interested in something like this, obviously this is the first time we've done this, but we are able to do it if anybody else is interested in that. So you can give us a shout. We can go through what the price would be to have this sort of work done, okay, and what you require. So things like your knock sensors, things like your throttle body that needs changing. You need to obviously get an ECU, a gearbox, etc., etc. But yeah, we can take a 1UZ harness and we can make it work on a 3UZ as well. Okay, but thanks for watching, guys. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask below. As I always say, I don't know what you guys don't know. If you ask me questions below and I get something in similar again, I'll try and make a video doing an explanation specifically on that subject, and a relatively shorter video, not an hour-long video where I go through an entire harness. Okay, but thanks for watching, guys. Neil, hope you enjoy your trip to France. We'll get this all boxed up and we'll speak tomorrow and get it all sent out to you. But everybody else, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.
Never break, always fight, never quit, do it right, play the game, win it life, have no shame, there's no time, feel the pain, live the grind, I could change, in my mind, pick a lane, commit and climb.